Hello, everyone. I'm Tanya Rivero. Thank you for joining us. We begin this hour in Florida, where Governor Ron Desantis has signed new voting restrictions into law. The Republican says the new measures will help solidify public faith in election systems. This comes just months after the governor praised the security of the 2020 elections. Critics accuse DeSantis of trying to make it harder for people to vote, particularly voters of color. The new restrictions place limits on who can drop off ballots and when they can do so. It also requires voters to sign up for mail-in ballots every year. The law also prohibits any actions that could influence those standing in line to vote. That means nonpartisan groups can no longer hand out food or water to people waiting in the hot Florida sun. Governor DeSantis signed the bill live on Fox News earlier this morning.
Look, I'm not a fan of drop boxes at all, to be honest with you, but the legislature wanted to keep them. But they need to be monitored. You can't just leave these boxes out where there's no supervision, where they're in all hours of the night. So the drop boxes will be available only when they're monitored and during regular voting hours.
For more on this, let's bring in Adam Brewster. He's a CBS News political reporter. Adam, welcome. So remind us how this law actually came to fruition and what has been the general reaction so far, both there in Florida and, across the country.
Well, certainly, Tanya, this is a trend we've followed and talked about at length across the country. Republican lawmakers trying to amend their voting laws after the 2020 election. This bill, in Florida went through several iterations. There were some controversial provisions, including banning ballot drop boxes or requiring people to show ID when they use ballot drop boxes that didn't make it in to the final product. Instead, there are just restrictions on things like hours of access and requiring there to be someone from the election supervisor's office, as you heard Governor DeSantis talk about there. And you're right, he did praise Florida's election system. He said this is about staying ahead of the curve, not resting on their laurels. That's kind of been his message and the message from Republicans throughout who have applauded this process. Democrats have pointed out that this comes after an election with record mail voting, and when Democrats cast about 680,000 more mail ballots than Republicans did. And they say this is about making it harder for people to access mail ballots. The president of the NAACP, Derek Johnson, called it a blatant and calculated attack on the right to vote. He said we should be working to expand voting to strengthen our democracy as opposed to restricting and limiting the American people's sacred right to participate in elections. He called the new bill a horrifying reminder at the fragility of democracy. That has sort of been what we've heard from Democrats, voting rights, civil rights groups, in states around the country, not just Florida, as these bills have passed.
And so, Adam, do Democrats have any way to combat this law down the road, or some of these voting rights activists you were mentioning?
It's through the courts, and we've already seen at least one lawsuit that's been filed challenging some of the provisions in Florida's law that add some of the new restrictions. We've seen groups challenge laws that have been passed in Georgia, in Iowa, and Montana. These will be, long, drawn-out fights, and this issue of voting rights is going to be one of the key issues in the 2020 midterm elections. At these state levels where governors have signed laws, it will probably play a role in the discourse of Senate elections, as we've seen potential changes from the federal level that have kind of stalled in the Senate. We might see that kick back up in the conversation in the next couple of weeks, and there will continue to be discussions about the filibuster. This is going to be an issue that's a critical campaign issue. For now, what Democrats can do in a lot of these states, especially once they're done, the only way to really fight back is taking court action. We've seen those court cases go. Of course, it remains to be seen what judges will do with these lawsuits, whether they will take them and whether they'll strike down certain provisions or uphold these laws, and ultimately if any of them will wind their way up to the Supreme Court to have a say in terms of what type of law states can draw.
All right, Adam Brewster, thank you so much for joining us.